Thanks for having me. I think that this conference is such an awesome idea, so I just, again, wanted to give a quick shout out to the organizers, and thank you so much for having me. So today I'm going to talk to you about machine learning for accessibility, and accessibility is a super wide topic, so I'm just going to let you know that specifically what I mean by accessibility today is accessibility on the web, so anything to do with websites and the way that we access content online. So as introduced, I'm Hinton. I'm an open source author, so I maintain a lot of open source libraries in my spare time. During the day, I write code and documentation for Microsoft. I'm on the Cloud Developer Advocate team, which is the same team as Elena. And this talk today had a lot of different titles that I cycled through. One of them was like new tools for old problems. Another one that I considered as well was how we almost ruined everything. So you could probably see where this is going already, especially given around what's been coming up in the media about machine learning. This is really more a tool about tools and ethics, and it's more a talk about trying to inspire us as a community to start thinking about the good that machine learning can do, but also think about how much work we still have to go in order to start tackling this big problem. So I know it's early, but I'm going to start you off with a pop quiz. Does anybody know what this Unicode code point is? I know it's super early. I know you've got the entire table memorized as well, right? Cool. So this is actually what that Unicode code point is. It is the symbol for, it is the universal symbol of accessibility. And so this here is an artist who I've been pretty heavily inspired by while exploring some of the ideas that I'm going to talk to you about today. Her name is Sarah Hinton. She is an artist, design researcher, and a writer, and she's based in New York City. This is a picture of her posing next to a project that she worked on with some others, and I think it's really, really important to talk about, and it's definitely formed the inspiration behind, again, some of the ideas that I'm going to explore in this talk today. So Sarah looked at the universal symbol of access, and she thought that it just wasn't really addressing the lived experience of people who use assistive tech, especially people who make use of wheelchairs every day. And so she set about to hopefully redesign the symbol to feel more inclusive, but also more representative of that community. And so the original icon was designed by Kerford and Monton, and I think it was in, I don't have my speaker notes up, but I think it was in the 1960s, I could be wrong. So it was designed a long time ago, and originally, you might see that the pose is kind of odd on the icon on the left, and that's because it was originally designed just as the wheelchair, and then they decided at the last minute that it didn't look sort of like personal enough and that people wouldn't be able to instantly recognize what the icon was. So they kind of just stuck this circle on the top of the wheelchair, and then it became a person. So I think that that's a really kind of, it's a clever fix, but it's also a really odd kind of scenario to think about of what that represents. It almost feels like that person is fused with their machine, or they are the machine, which is not necessarily true, right? It's a tool for somebody. It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily define who that person is. And so the redesigned logo by Hendren and Glennie, her art partner in this, shows like a more sort of engaged individual, seated on that wheelchair, and they're actually taking an active kind of position with their body. And so I think that that was really, really cool, and it definitely is, at least in my opinion, a huge improvement in the original symbol. And so the reason why I'm talking about this is because they didn't just go and redesign this and kind of very politely suggest that we start using it. They did this thing called guerrilla accessibility, where they went out on the town and they built a bunch of stencils, and they went around just literally graffitiing over the existing icons with this new one. And so I thought that was really cool. They took it one step further and they used guerrilla art in order to subvert the current logo to really make a statement. And so they got kids involved, and they ended up spray painting, the accessible icons and things like that. And I just thought it was such a cool idea, and I really, really liked the approach that they took, where they didn't just, politely put it online and ask that we use it. And so after a period of time, this icon actually started being adopted. So it still hasn't been approved by I think it's the board for universal symbols. They haven't actually approved this, but we're starting to see it in more and more cities. So New York City officially adopted it as its universal sign of access icon, which was really, really cool, but we're starting to see it in more and more states around the US as well, which is really, really encouraging. So if you go to the Accessible Icon Project's Instagram account, you'll see that they post a lot of sightings of the icon in the wild, and I just thought that this was such a cool thing. And if you have a look, the Apple emoji actually changed in the last, I think, couple of years to show this version of the icon as well, which I think is really cool. So anyone who has an iPhone and uses this emoji is actually seeing the updated, more active position. So if you want to read more, because I only have half an hour, and I could talk about Sarah Hinton for my entire talk, but I won't. You should definitely check out the pieces that she's written about accessibility. There are these articles here are sort of my favorites, and I will be probably heavily pulling quotes from some of these articles as well, just to sort of like wrap this around the concept of web accessibility. So I'm going to actually do that and open with a quote saying, and this again is from Sarah Hinton, from Towards an Ethics of its Estrangement. I think even a purist would agree that there are network-enhanced, extensive tools that we are using now that outpace even a provisional, context-specific ethics or grounded understanding about how to use them and about their ripple effects. The stakes at hand include human agency and passivity, even if it is impossible to understand the scale of human-machine changes with confident historical perspective. So this is very heavy, but what Sarah was referring to was cyborg culture and prosthetics. However, if you were sort of thinking about this quote, especially given that we are at a machine learning conference, I saw some parallels there that weren't just about cyborg culture and prosthetics, right? So here's what I saw. Network-enhanced, extensive tools we are using now that outpace even a provisional, context-specific ethics. So I read this now and I see a lot of relevance to what we're here for today, which is machine learning. And I think about machine learning in the context of guerrilla accessibility, and I think about how machine learning right now is used for things like profit. It's also being used to really severely impact negatively on other people's lives too, because of mistakes that we can make in this industry. And I think, what if we put this in a guerrilla accessibility context instead and try to improve people's lives with it? And so how do we do this for the web? How do we kind of apply this, given that the web is like hugely decentralized? And I come back to a quote by one of my friends, Rachel Simone Weil. She did a talk recently called Art After Dark, and I really love this quote because I really related to it, and it is, for me, coding has always been a critical design tool to ask, what if? And if the code doesn't do that, then frankly, I don't find it that interesting. To me, it's like being interested in a paintbrush without being interested in art, being interested in a guitar, but not being interested in music. So that gave me goosebumps, and like a lot of these projects are really about me asking that same question that Rachel asks herself when she produces her art, and that is, what if? And so when I was inspired by Sarah Hinton and thought about, because I'm a web developer by trade, and I've seen a lot of accessibility crimes in my over a decade of experience in front end, I was like, what if? What if we took this? What if we came up with something that was like just incredibly large, but we could actually try and achieve it? So I thought, what would happen if we took cross-site scripting and mixed that with machine learning? And so this is a really small experiment that I started in order to kind of try and expand on something that will hopefully be a bigger idea. So I wrote a quick tool called InstaCaption. It's essentially a bookmarklet, so it's able to kind of like hijack existing markup on a page. And so just to give you a bit of a primer on what this tool actually does, If you've never written HTML before, I apologize if that looks a little bit blurry, but this is the code that's required for creating an image on a HTML page. And so we have what's called an image tag. We give it the source or the src attribute, which allows us to just put the file name of the picture we want to see. And then in order to make this picture accessible for people who can't actually visually see the image, we add what's known as an alt tag or an alternative text tag. So this one in this case is a cat sitting on a Roomba looking at the camera. I feel like if you had a picture of a cat on a Roomba, you would definitely want people who can't see the image to understand the context of that, because that's hilarious. So what I did was I thought about this and I thought there is such a huge ton of social media sites out there, and a lot of them have user-generated content, right? And user-generated content is really tricky to make accessible because you're basically asking users who are not necessarily always technically savvy to provide captions for their images. And I know Twitter does it, but they don't have it turned on by default. And most other websites just don't have those descriptions available for people to type in. And then it comes down to, is that person uploading their photo going to go to that effort anyway? And so a big example of that is Instagram. You know, it's kind of a trend on Instagram to be like super ethereal and like not even post captions on your Instagram photos and just kind of, or just use a couple of emoji to describe your image, which is not super helpful. So what I ended up doing was I created a bookmarklet that you can't quite see that on the screen, but what it does is when you load an Instagram profile page, it will go through all of the photos. It will use a machine learning API endpoint, which is just like you can use it with IBM. There is a Microsoft one. There's also a Google AI endpoint as well for this. You can also use something like OpenCV, which is a computer vision library. And what it does is it goes through every single image on the page, and then it feeds it into this machine learning algorithm that can then give a pretty scarily accurate description of what the image actually is. And the console output that you see in there in the GIF is just kind of showing that it's posting those images and it's actually getting that response back. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you use this. I am using it very specifically on one of my friends' pages because you have to have that data consent in order to use those images and feed them through that API endpoint. But if you were to do this with something local like OpenCV, you could absolutely do that. And so what it does is once it actually fetches the description, it will then go and alter all of the HTML and it will insert every single one as alt tags. And so you can imagine that if someone is going through someone's Instagram account, that's way, way more accessible for them to be able to see what Batsley Adams has been up to lately. And some of them were things like a selfie of a man with a beard in a mirror, right? And so just scarily accurate, which is really awesome. So again, that's using like machine learning models that have already been prepared for you. You don't have to be a machine learning expert, and it's really it's a REST API call away. And there are multiple companies that have these endpoints, including Microsoft, which is the one that I used. So just to give you an idea of just how much code is required, only 28 lines were required in order to write this bookmarklet, and then you just kind of minify and package it up, and you could make a browser extension out of this, but again, just make sure you get the consent of people to put these images through some privately owned API models. But I thought it was really cool. Similarly, around the same time, hugely coincidentally, one of my colleagues created a really cool website that basically allows you to dynamically generate alt text. So if you don't want to sit down and handwrite all of the descriptions for images on your website, you can upload an image to this page, and it will go in, again, use one of the computer vision APIs, and it will find a description and allow you to actually use that. So that had accessibility in mind as well, and I think that's really cool that it's not just like one person that's kind of thinking about this. So that's an example of how we can use things like these technologies just to actually make things better for people who are still missing out on certain experiences on the web. Another project that I've been trying to look into, which has sort of been my white whale recently, has been live closed caption injection. So on YouTube, if you upload a video, you get either automated captions or you can pay a stenographer to produce captions for you. And so all of my YouTube videos, if you go on my account, have human-produced like stenography captions because I believe that everyone should be able to have high-quality access to things. However, machine learning algorithms and auto captions are getting better and better every single day. In order to do live closed captions, for example, at conferences or live streams online, hiring a real-time stenographer can be a little bit more expensive than getting like post-video production captions done. And so that varies between $150 to $300 an hour US. And so that's something that I've wanted to make use of for a long time, but I just don't have the budget for. And the reason why I'm so interested in live closed caption injection is that I run a Twitch stream every single Sunday, and this is like a really weird screen cap of my stream just a couple of days ago. Was it yesterday? Oh, wow, it was yesterday, okay. I got up really early for this one because it's normally 11 a.m. EST, and I'm on PDT, so I had to get up at like 6:30 to do this. So I live stream every single Sunday for 2 hours, and I live code like my open source work because a lot of people feel intimidated about getting started with open source. So it's really just me showing everyone that I make the same mistakes. I get stack traces that I don't understand all the time. I always have issues with my package lock.json and all that kind of thing. And so, you know, like we literally had that problem yesterday. And so there's this very lively chat on the right of that screenshot, and everyone's sort of pair programming with me. But I realized that I'm leaving a certain amount of people out, right? Like there are a certain amount of people that I'm just not reaching because I don't have that live transcription of what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is so important in my stream because I'm literally talking aloud while I'm debugging, and I'm also addressing and talking back to people in the chat and explaining technical concepts. And so Twitch does actually support live captions, but it's very, very difficult for a single individual to organize that for your stream because you have to have a physical hardware caption encoder. If you don't have that, you need a cloud service that can cost like up to $300 per stream for me to do. Then I have to pay the stenographer and then get the stenographer remotely to listen to my stream in advance, but also be sending their captions to this encoding service. It's just not easy right now. And so it's not that I don't want to use humans, but there can be maybe some ways that we can explore this using machine learning. And so what I did was I decided that I would write a Twitch extension that hijacks the existing closed caption container in the DOM, or the document object model, in the HTML page overlaid over the video. I then had to I use a model that is reachable via WebSocket API, and it's like a speech-to-text service. So again, like a lot of different cloud providers provide this, including Microsoft, so I use the custom speech service from them. I fed in 2 hours of my YouTube videos with like the actual like human transcribed captions, and then I trained basically like an adaptation model on top of the normal US conversational model for Australian American English, because my accent is not quite American, it's not quite Australian. It struggles with words like GitHub and package.json and things like that. So I also fed in a bunch of technical terms for a language adaptation model. And this is like my preliminary test. So in the bottom there it says, hello there, and good evening, I hope that you're all doing really well today. And so this was me in a hotel room just before TwitchCon trying to test this out. So I have actually gotten it to 80% and above accuracy, but to me that's still like 2 out of every 10 words is going to be wrong, right? So I'm trying to get it more accurate, and I'm trying to figure out a way to not do cross-site scripting in order to get that happening. But yeah, we're still in guerrilla accessibility mode here, but I'm really excited to keep going with this. I've been working on this for almost a year now. But I'm trying really hard to get this going because I think that it's not, if I can afford human real-time stenographers, then maybe other people who are live streaming still can't afford that, right? So if I can create something that's accessible, if I can push speech-to-text machine learning models to become more and more accurate, then I would just love to see that used as a technology for good to provide access for people. Again, it's 16 lines of code to make the Twitch extension, and then I have a whole bunch of like back-end stuff that's kind of doing the WebSocket. I have a web page that records my speech and live translates it using that WebSocket API, which is pretty cool. But as I said, like the problem is that these little kind of dinky experiments that I've made, they're not web scale, right? That's our favorite word to use. They're not trying to solve the problem of the fact that it's not that we can't create new accessible content, but we have a whole bunch of existing content that isn't accessible still, right, online. So think about the fact that the internet has been around for a really long time, several decades, and think of all the content that's been uploaded, and think about all the social media videos and pictures and other things that just aren't accessible that are already online, and it's not accessible, and it seems like such an insurmountable task to get that done. So I came up with a few ideas. Again, these are incredibly idealistic, but I want to sort of start talking about them because I want them to feel less crazy to me and more like something we can all get together and do. So who's heard of the SETI at Home project? Okay, a few of you, yeah, you might be able to see where I'm going with this. So the SETI at Home project, I love this screenshot so much. It is and was a screensaver that you ran on your computer when you weren't using your computer. So if you had idle CPU cycles, you could actually run this really badass looking screensaver, and it would crunch like audio, telescopic data from space to search for extraterrestrial life, which is, to me, amazing. I missed out on this because I didn't have the internet until like the early 2000s because I lived in Australia and the internet was still like a fantasy for a while. And this here is crunching, searching for Gaussians, new Gaussian. It's just intense. So it would crunch all this data to see if we kind of were able to get any kind of bounce back from the radio waves, which is amazing. So this was kind of installed all throughout the world on people's computers, and so we were really just had this distributed network of like CPU cycles crunching on this data, which I thought was really cool. And you can probably see the ridiculous path that I'm going here. We're also using idle CPU and GPU cycles right now to do something, again, which is for profit and not necessarily to make other people's lives better. So I'm assuming that we replace Bitcoin mining with guerrilla accessibility. And so I think that we could do like a SETI at home thing, right? And like kind of distribute that. But then we have a problem there, which is how do we store all of those descriptions that we've crunched on all these images and all these captions for all these videos? How do we actually get those descriptions, back to people, and then they're always going to be decoupled from the picture? Like, how do we actually store this? Do we need a database? Like, this is the kind of the hard technical questions that you all are going to find me during the break and be like, I don't really know about this. But I came across this paper in December when I was thinking, I wonder if someone's used like something like steganography to like impregnate the images with the actual descriptions themselves. Literally a week before I had that thought, this paper was published, which I then found, and it's called Accessible Images, a Model to Build Self-Describing Images for Assisting Screen Reader Users. I actually gave a talk at Papers We Love in New York about this. I implemented the algorithms. It was super, super fun. The idea is that, let's say I have a description of an image, a close-up photo of a lion facing to the left. You take every single letter in that description, and you find like the ASCII, you find the ASCII code for it. So in this case, the C is 99, so that's the character code. You convert that to binary, and then you go through and you just stash like every single bit of that letter just randomly in like pixel color values in the actual image itself. So I'll show you a really quick example in case you haven't seen stenography before. Let's take the first pixel of this picture of a lion. The values, the color values of that pixel are 20, 255, 102. Let's just pick the red pixel because that usually shows the least perceptible difference to the human eye if you tweak a bit. And what we do is we store one bit in one red pixel value. So it's very, very, it's not very efficient, but in a large enough image, there's plenty of pixels to hide this. So the actual binary value of 20 here is this, and then we take the least significant bit, which I'm sorry, the font did not come over very well, but imagine that the last 0 is circled. What we do is we take that character code, we take the first bit, right, and then we stuff it over here to the last one, and then we've stored one bit of like one letter. But then you just keep going, and then you go through every single bit of every single letter in that description, and then you store it. And so you can store that with like a seeded random kind of distribution, or you can just do it linearly. We're not actually trying to like hide the information from like, the feds or whatever, which is what steganography is usually used for. We actually want that discoverable, so we can have some kind of seed based on the file or something like that, so it's easy to be read. So I thought, we could use basically the idea of SETI at home, and then we could crunch these images, and then we could then inject the descriptions and actually store them along with the images. Of course, there are technical compression issues and things like that, but I thought that that was a really cool idea. So that's the current process that I'm in right now. I would love to talk to you over the next few days if you're interested or have any more ideas, or even if you just want to tell me that I'm barking up the wrong tree. But yeah, that's sort of what I've been thinking about lately with guerrilla accessibility, and I really would love to kind of have a proof of concept of this up and running. I just think it's interesting even just for talking about this issue, right? I think it gives us a platform to be able to really have a discussion about it. So I'll finish up this opening talk just by saying that I'm really, really excited about machine learning, but probably not for reasons that some people are. I really think that new tech should find ways to assist people, not ignore or widen the gap. And right now I'm seeing a lot of damaging effects from this, and I'm really, really scared that this is going to be taken away from us, that we're not going to be able to just roll out of bed and be able to produce models and things, and that it will get so regulated that we won't be able to actually do these things unless we have enough money or it will turn a profit. So I just think that we're right at that moment where we have so much freedom with this and we could really use it. So let's not mess it up. Hopefully this has inspired you to sort of think about what we can use this for, and the fact that you don't necessarily have to know everything about machine learning to get started with actually using these services. That's what they're here for. A lot of large cloud companies, yes, they're making a profit from this, but they're trying to democratize machine learning so that you don't have to be an expert on this. And this is exactly what this whole conference is about as well. So I'm really glad that you're all here today. So I'm going to leave you with a quote from Sarah Hendren, and it is, "Rethink the default bodily experience." I think that's definitely the biggest paradigm shift you need to make when you're thinking about accessibility and like who we're leaving out. There just really is no default bodily experience. We all vary so wildly. There's no default perfect user on the web either. So let's maybe start talking about using machine learning to help repair the existing web. And thank you very much.